I stood in my own kitchen, watching my mother-in-law open my refrigerator like she owned the place, and something inside me finally snapped. "Clarice, what are you doing here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She didn't even turn around. "Julian gave me a key months ago. I'm checking to see if you're feeding my son properly." My hands clenched into fists at my sides. "Get out of my house!" She finally looked at me, that cold smile spreading across her face. "Your house, sweetheart, you might want to check whose name is actually on the deed." That was the moment I knew my marriage was over. My name is Elena Rivera, and I'm 34 years old, a successful interior designer who built her business from absolutely nothing. People always told me I was too patient, too willing to give second chances when I should have walked away. I also had this stubborn pride that made me refuse to admit when I'd made a mistake, which meant I stayed in my failing marriage way longer than I should have. I believed I could fix anything if I just tried hard enough, if I just stayed calm enough, if I just gave it one more chance. That belief nearly destroyed me. My husband Julian was 36, handsome in that boyish way that made people trust him instantly, but he had the backbone of a jellyfish. He worked in marketing, but never seemed to actually make any decisions at his job or anywhere else in his life. His mother Clarice was 61 and had been controlling every aspect of his existence since birth, and she had no intention of stopping just because he got married. The thing about marrying Julian was that I thought I was getting a partner, but what I actually got was a child who came with overbearing parents attached. Clarice would call 15 times a day. She had opinions about everything from how I decorated our home to what I served for dinner to how I wore my hair. And Julian never, not once, told her to back off. "She means well," he'd say, looking at me with those puppy dog eyes that used to make me melt but now just made me angry. "She's just worried about us." But Clarice wasn't worried about us. She was worried about losing control of her son. The final straw came on a Tuesday evening in September. I'd just landed a huge contract with a hotel chain to redesign their entire lobby aesthetic, the kind of career-defining deal I'd been working toward for years. I came home excited, ready to celebrate with my husband, and found Clarice sitting at my dining table with a stack of our financial documents spread out in front of her. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded. Julian was standing in the corner looking guilty. "Mom wanted to help us organize our finances," he mumbled. "Help us?" I felt my voice rising. "Julian, these are private documents. Bank statements, tax returns, my business accounts. You gave her access to everything." Clara stood up slowly, smoothing her expensive skirt. "Elena, dear, you're being hysterical. Julian asked for my help because, frankly, your spending has gotten out of control." I turned to my husband. "Is that what you think? That I'm irresponsible with money?" He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Mom just pointed out that maybe we could be saving more if you weren't spending so much on your business. The business that paid for most of our lifestyle. The business I'd built with my own hands, while Julian coasted through his corporate job. The business that Clarice had always resented because it meant I had independence and my own identity separate from being her son's wife. "Get out," I said quietly to Clarice. "Excuse me," she raised one perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "I said get out of my house, now." She gathered her purse with exaggerated slowness. "Julian, are you going to let her speak to your mother this way?" I waited, giving him one last chance to choose me over her. He opened his mouth, closed it, then said, "Elena, maybe you should apologize. Mom was just trying to help." That night, I packed a bag and stayed at my best friend Darren's apartment. Darren was 38, my former college roommate who'd stuck with me through everything. "You should have left him years ago," Darren said, pouring me wine. "I know." I stared into the glass. "I kept thinking it would get better, that he'd finally stand up to her." Darren shook his head. "People like Julian don't change. And people like Clarice don't stop until they've consumed everything around them." He was right. But what Darren didn't know, what nobody knew yet, was that I'd been preparing for this moment for months. Because I might have been too patient and too stubborn to admit my marriage was failing, but I wasn't stupid. 6 months earlier, Clarice had come to me with a proposition. Her husband, Renato, Julian's father, who was 63 and ran a struggling construction company, needed help securing a business loan. "You have such a good relationship with banks because of your business," Clarice had said sweetly, "and your family. Renato just needs someone to co-sign to show the bank he has support." Every instinct told me to refuse, but Julian had begged. "Please, Alina, Dad's business is failing. If we don't help, my parents could lose everything." So I'd agreed, but on my terms. I'd spent 3 weeks with my lawyer structuring the deal. I co-signed the loan, yes, but I'd made sure every document included clauses protecting me. I'd required Renato to put up collateral, including the family vacation home and several business assets. And I'd included a clause that if the business defaulted, I had first rights to seize those assets to recover my exposure. Clarice had barely glanced at the paperwork. She was so confident in her control over me, so certain I'd never actually enforce any of those provisions, that she'd signed everything without reading it. Renato had done the same. That was their first mistake. Their second mistake was continuing to treat me like garbage while depending on my financial backing. The loan was for $200,000, and within 3 months, Renato's company had blown through it with nothing to show for it except more debt. I'd been watching the accounts carefully, documenting every missed payment, every financial misstep. I had proof that Renato had used loan money meant for business expenses to fund his and Clarice's lifestyle. A new car, expensive dinners, a cruise to the Mediterranean. All while his company circled the drain. When I walked into my lawyer's office the day after the kitchen confrontation, I had a folder 3 inches thick with documentation. Lydia Cortez was 41, sharp as broken glass, and had a reputation for destroying opposing counsel in family court. "Tell me everything," she said, settling behind her desk. I did. I told her about 7 years of marriage to a man who'd never once chosen me over his mother. About Clarice's constant intrusions, her manipulation, her control. About Renato's failing business and the loan I'd been pressured into co-signing. About Julian's complete inability to function as an adult independent of his parents. Lydia listened without interrupting, taking notes. When I finished, she looked up with something like admiration in her eyes. "You documented all of this," I nodded. "Every text message, every email. Every financial transaction. I have records of Clarice letting herself into our home without permission, including security camera footage. I have proof that Julian gave her access to our joint bank accounts without my consent. I have everything," Lydia smiled. "Then let's burn it all down." The divorce papers were filed that afternoon. Julian called me 16 times before I finally answered. "Alina, please, we can work this out. Come home and let's talk about this." I was standing in my new apartment, a small but beautiful space I'd rented in the Arts District. "There's nothing to talk about, Julian. I want a divorce." "But why? What did I do?" His confusion would have been funny if it wasn't so pathetic. "What did you do? Julian, you let your mother destroy our marriage. You gave her keys to our home. You gave her access to our finances. You never once defended me or stood up for me. You chose her over me every single day for 7 years. That's not fair. She's my mother, I can't just cut her out of my life." There it was, the fundamental problem laid bare. "No," I agreed, "but you could have set boundaries. You could have told her that some things were private between husband and wife. You could have protected our marriage. You chose not to." Silence on the other end. Then, "My parents are really upset." "Mom's saying you're being vindictive." I laughed, a harsh sound even to my own ears. "Julian, you haven't seen vindictive yet, but you're about to." I hung up. That might have been my pride talking, my stubborn refusal to let them think they'd won. Darren had warned me about that part of my personality. "Don't let revenge consume you," he'd said. Sometimes the best revenge is just living well and moving on. But I couldn't let it go. Maybe that was my biggest flaw, the one that had kept me in a bad marriage for so long and was now pushing me toward something darker. I couldn't accept defeat. I couldn't walk away without making them understand what they'd done. The first mediation session was a disaster. Clarice showed up even though she wasn't invited, sitting next to Julian like she was his co-spouse. "My son needs support during this difficult time," she announced when questioned. Lydia looked at the mediator. "Is this allowed?" The mediator, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, sighed. "Mrs. Santos, you need to wait outside." "This is between your son and his wife." Clarice's face turned red. "I have a right to be here. I'm his mother." "You're not a party to this divorce," Lydia said coolly. "Please leave or we'll have security escort you out." I watched Clarice's carefully maintained composure crack. "Julian, tell them." "Tell them I'm staying." Julian looked between his mother and me, paralyzed as always. "Mom, maybe you should wait outside." Clarice stood up so fast her chair fell over. "After everything I've done for you, after I raised you and sacrificed everything, this is how you repay me," she pointed at me. "This is her fault. She's turning you against your own family." I met her eyes calmly. "I'm not turning him against anyone. I'm divorcing him." "There's a difference." She leaned across the table, her face inches from mine. "You'll regret this. You think you can just walk away from this family. We'll destroy you. We'll take everything." That was when she made her biggest mistake. She threatened me in front of witnesses, including a court reporter. Lydia was already taking notes. I just smiled. "Is that a legal threat, Clarice? Because my lawyer is writing down everything you're saying." She straightened up, realizing her error. "I'm just stating facts." "You owe this family respect." The mediator intervened. "Mrs. Santos, I'm going to have to ask you to leave now." "Security." It took 2 security guards to escort Clarice out, and we could hear her shouting in the hallway for another 10 minutes. Julian looked mortified. "I'm sorry about that." Lydia jumped in before I could respond. "Let's discuss assets. Elena, you've provided a comprehensive list of marital property." "Julian, where's your financial disclosure?" He fumbled with his folder. "I have it here somewhere." As he searched, Lydia continued. "We'll also need complete documentation of the loan Elena co-signed for your father's business, including repayment records." Julian's head snapped up. "What does that have to do with our divorce?" Lydia's smile was razor-sharp. "Your wife has significant financial exposure from that loan. If the business defaults, she's liable for the full amount. That's a marital debt that needs to be addressed in the settlement." I watched Julian's face as understanding dawned. "But that loan was to help my parents." "Elena agreed to it." Lydia looked at me, and I nodded. She opened another folder. "Elena agreed to co-sign a business loan with specific terms and conditions, all of which are legally binding. According to our records, Renato's company has missed the last 3 payments. The loan is currently in default." The mediator leaned forward. "Is this documented?" Lydia slid copies across the table. "Bank statements, loan agreements, and correspondence showing repeated attempts to collect payment. Elena is not only entitled to protection from this debt in the divorce, but she also has legal standing to pursue the collateral outlined in the original loan agreement." Julian's hands were shaking as he looked through the papers. "This says if Dad defaults, Elena can seize the beach house." I spoke for the first time. "And the commercial property on Riverside, and your father's vintage car collection. And several business assets, all of which were listed as collateral when I co-signed." Julian's face went white. "You can't do that. That beach house has been in my family for 20 years. My parents live there half the year." "Then your parents should have made their loan payments," Lydia said simply. "The loan terms were clear. Elena fulfilled her obligation by co-signing and putting her own credit at risk. Your parents defaulted. There are consequences." The mediation ended with nothing resolved except Julian's growing horror at what I had planned. He called me that night. "Elena, please, my parents will lose everything." "Is that really what you want?" I was sitting on my new balcony, looking out at the city lights. What I wanted was a husband who respected me. What I wanted was in-laws who treated me like family instead of an inconvenience. What I wanted was a marriage where I came first at least once in 7 years. I didn't get any of that. His voice cracked. "I know I made mistakes. I know I should have done better, but please don't punish my parents for my failures. That almost got to me. That little crack in my armor, where sentiment and old feelings tried to leak through. But then, I remembered Clarice going through my financial documents. I remembered Julian giving her keys to our home. I remembered 7 years of being treated like I wasn't good enough, wasn't part of the family, wasn't worthy of basic respect. Your parents made their own choices, I said. They borrowed money they couldn't pay back. They used business loan funds for personal expenses. They treated me like garbage while depending on my financial backing. These are consequences, not punishment. I hung up before he could respond. My stubbornness was showing again, that inability to back down once I'd committed to a course of action. Darren had called me out on it over lunch. You're going scorched earth on this, he'd said, concerned. Are you sure that's what you want? They destroyed my marriage. They made my life hell for 7 years. Why shouldn't I fight back? He'd looked at me seriously. Because revenge has a cost, not just for them but for you. You're spending all your time and energy on this instead of moving forward with your life. He was right, but I couldn't stop. My pride wouldn't let me. I needed them to know they couldn't treat people this way without consequences. I needed to win. The weeks that followed were brutal. Julian's lawyer tried every tactic to protect Renato's assets from seizure. They argued that the loan was a separate matter from the divorce. They claimed I'd entered into the agreement in bad faith. They even tried to argue that, as Julian's wife at the time, I'd had a legal obligation to help his parents. Lydia demolished every argument. The loan agreement was ironclad. I'd entered into it in good faith, complete with protections any reasonable lender would require. And the default was entirely due to Renato's mismanagement and misuse of funds. In the meantime, I started receiving messages. Clarice sent long, rambling emails about what a terrible person I was, how I'd deceived her son, how I was destroying their family. Julian's sister called to yell at me. Distant relatives I'd never met sent Facebook messages calling me a gold digger. I documented all of it. Every threat, every insult, every attempt to harass or intimidate me. My lawyer loved it. They're making our case better with every message, Lydia said. Keep forwarding these to me. I should have felt victorious, but mostly I felt tired. The revenge I'd planned so carefully was unfolding exactly as I'd designed, but it was consuming my life. I couldn't focus on work. I couldn't enjoy my new apartment. Every spare moment was spent checking emails, reviewing documents, planning the next legal move. Darren staged an intervention of sorts. Elena, you got what you wanted. You're getting divorced. You're protected from the loan debt. You've proven your point. Maybe it's time to let the rest go. I'd snapped at him. Let it go. They spent 7 years making me miserable. They're still sending me threatening messages. Why should I let anything go? He'd held up his hands. Because you're becoming what you hate. You're so focused on revenge that you're turning into the same kind of controlling, obsessive person Clarice is. That had stung because it was true. My need to win, to make them pay, was consuming me the same way Clarice's need to control had consumed her. But I couldn't stop. The court date for the loan default hearing arrived on a cold morning in November. I dressed carefully in a dark blue suit that projected both professionalism and confidence. Lydia met me outside the courthouse. Are you ready for this? I nodded, though my stomach was churning. This was it. The moment where my carefully laid plans would either succeed or fail. Inside the courtroom, Renato and Clarice sat with their lawyer, a nervous-looking man who kept adjusting his tie. Julian sat separately with his divorce attorney, looking miserable. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, reviewed the case file. This is a straightforward default case, she said. Mr. Santos, you borrowed $200,000 with Mrs. Rivera as cosigner. You put up significant collateral. You defaulted on the loan. Is there any dispute about these facts? Renato's lawyer stood. Your Honor, we don't dispute the default. However, we believe the collateral seizure is excessive given the circumstances. The judge looked unimpressed. The circumstances being that your client took a large loan and failed to repay it. Renato stood up suddenly. Your Honor, if I may speak, That woman ruined my son's marriage. This is revenge, pure and simple. She's using a technical default to destroy our family. The judge's expression hardened. Mr. Santos, I suggest you sit down and let your lawyer speak. But to address your point, this court doesn't care about your family drama. You signed a loan agreement. You provided collateral, you defaulted. These are legal obligations, not technical details. Clarice couldn't help herself. This is ridiculous. She married into our family. She owes us loyalty. You can't let her do this. The judge turned her cold gaze to Clarice. Ma'am, who are you? Clarice drew herself up. I'm his wife, Julian's mother. I have a right to be heard. The judge looked at the bailiff. Remove this woman from my courtroom. She's not a party to this case. As Clarice was escorted out, screaming about injustice and family betrayal, I felt something unexpected. Not triumph, but a hollow kind of sadness. This was what my marriage had come to. This ugly scene in a courtroom with people who were supposed to be family destroying each other. The judge continued. The loan agreement is clear, Mrs. Rivera has the right to pursue collateral to recover her exposure. Mr. Santos, you have 30 days to either bring the loan current or surrender the collateral properties listed in the agreement. Renato's face crumbled. Your Honor, please. That beach house is our home. We're too old to start over. I found my voice. Your Honor, if I may, the judge nodded. Mr. Santos spent loan money meant for business expenses on personal purchases. He used my financial backing to fund his lifestyle while his business failed. I have documentation of these expenditures. I pulled out the folder I'd been carrying. A $30,000 car. 2 Caribbean cruises, totaling $18,000. Extensive home renovations to that beach house worth $45,000. All paid for with loan funds while he claimed the business needed capital. The judge reviewed the documents with growing disapproval. Mr. Santos, is this accurate? Renato's lawyer whispered frantically in his ear, but Renato was past caring. I needed those things. A man has to maintain certain standards. I was going to pay the loan back once business picked up. The judge closed the folder. You used business loan funds for personal expenses and luxury items while defaulting on the loan. Mrs. Rivera is entitled to pursue all remedies outlined in the loan agreement. Motion granted. Court is adjourned. Renato stood there stunned as the judge left. Then he turned to me, his face twisted with rage. You destroyed us. We took you into our family, and this is how you repay us. Julian's voice cut through the courtroom. Dad, stop. This is your fault. You borrowed money you couldn't repay. You lied about what you'd use it for. Elena was protecting herself. Renato turned on his son. Don't you dare take her side. She's not family anymore. Julian's response surprised me. She never was family to you. That was always the problem. You and Mom treated her like an outsider and an ATM machine. You used her. And now you're paying for it. For the first time in 7 years, Julian had stood up to his parents. It should have felt like victory, but it just felt sad. Too little, too late. Outside the courthouse, Lydia congratulated me. That went perfectly. Within 30 days, you'll have control of significant assets. Enough to cover the loan exposure and then some. I nodded, feeling numb. What happens to them? Lydia shrugged. Not your problem. They'll probably have to file bankruptcy, downsize significantly. But that's the consequence of their choices. Julian caught up with me in the parking garage. Elena, wait. I turned, seeing him clearly for maybe the first time. Not the charming man I'd fallen in love with, but a weak person who'd let his parents run his life and destroy his marriage. That took guts, I said, standing up to them in there. He looked broken. It doesn't fix anything though, does it? I shook my head. No, it doesn't. He stepped closer. Is there any chance we could try again? I'll be different. I'll set boundaries. I'll put you first. Part of me, the part that had stayed too long and tried too hard, wanted to believe him. But I'd learned my lesson. Julian, you only changed when it cost you everything. That's not real change, that's desperation. Tears ran down his face. I love you, I never stopped loving you. I felt surprisingly little. No anger, no satisfaction, just a tired kind of sadness. I loved you too, but love isn't enough when respect is missing. Your parents never respected me, and you never required them to. That's not something we can fix now. I walked away, leaving him standing there. It should have felt empowering, but instead it felt like the end of a very long, very exhausting battle. The next 30 days were chaos. Renato tried frantically to raise money to pay off the loan, but his credit was destroyed and his business was worthless. Clarice called me repeatedly, alternating between threats and begging. I blocked their numbers and changed my email. The beach house seizure happened on a rainy December morning. I wasn't there for it, couldn't bring myself to watch, but Lydia sent me photos. A beautiful 3-bedroom cottage right on the water, worth at least $400,000. Along with the commercial property and other assets, I was recovering far more than my loan exposure. You could sell everything and come out significantly ahead, Lydia told me. Or you could keep some of the properties as investments. I stared at the photos of the beach house. Clarice and Renato had raised their children there. Julian had learned to swim off that dock. It had been in their family for decades. And now it was mine because they'd been too arrogant to think I'd ever enforce the loan terms. My stubbornness told me to keep it, to hold onto this trophy of my victory. But another part of me, the part that was tired of revenge consuming my life, wanted to let it go. I ended up selling everything except the commercial property, which was generating rental income. I paid off my loan exposure, covered my legal fees, and still came out $100,000 ahead. I put that money into a trust that I couldn't touch for 5 years, insurance against my own tendency to make impulsive financial decisions when emotions were running high. Clarice and Renato filed for bankruptcy in January. They moved to a small apartment in a less expensive part of town. Their social standing, so important to Clarice, was destroyed. People who'd once sought their company now avoided them. The divorce finalized in February, 7 months after I'd filed. Julian got to keep his car and his retirement account. I kept my business, my investments, and all the assets I'd seized from his parents. We split our limited other marital property down the middle. At the final hearing, Julian tried one more time. "I'm moving to Portland," he said. "Starting over, away from my parents, maybe becoming the person I should have been all along." I wished him well and meant it. Whatever anger I'd had toward him had burned out months ago, leaving only ash and exhaustion. "I hope you figure it out," I told him honestly. He nodded sadly. "I'm sorry for all of it. You deserved so much better." On that, we finally agreed. I rebuilt my life slowly after that. My design business flourished once I could focus on it properly. I moved to a larger apartment with huge windows and filled it with plants and art. I started dating again, carefully, taking my time to really know people before letting them close. Darren remained my constant, reminding me to actually enjoy my freedom instead of just working constantly. "You won," he told me over dinner one night. "But it cost you a year of your life consumed with revenge. Was it worth it?" I thought about it honestly. I don't know. I needed to stand up for myself. I needed them to face consequences. "But you were right that it consumed me. I became obsessed with winning, with making them pay. That wasn't healthy." He raised his glass. "To learning expensive lessons," I clinked my glass against his, "to moving forward." The unexpected twist came 6 months later. I received a letter at my office, forwarded from my old address. It was from Julian. Inside was a short note written in his familiar handwriting. "Alina, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I thought you should know. Mom and Dad are done. They filed for divorce last month. Turns out when the money and status disappeared, they had nothing left holding them together. Dad blamed Mom for pushing you too hard. Mom blamed Dad for the loan default. They've been living separately for 3 months now. I think about what you said about respect and love not being enough on its own. You were right about so many things. I'm in therapy now, working on actually becoming an independent adult. It's harder than I expected. I don't blame you for what happened. Looking back, I see how I failed you every single day. How I let them destroy our marriage because I was too weak to stand up to them. That's on me. I heard your business is doing incredibly well. I'm glad. You always deserved success. I hope you're happy. You earned it. Julian. I read the letter 3 times, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Satisfaction that Clarice and Renato were facing consequences for their toxic relationship. Sadness for Julian, finally growing up but too late to save us. And something else I hadn't expected, a kind of peace. My revenge had worked. I'd protected myself financially, extracted consequences for their behavior, and walked away with both my dignity and my assets intact. But the real victory wasn't in their destruction. It was in the fact that a year later, I didn't need the revenge anymore. I'd moved on. I'd rebuilt. I was happy. Clarice had been wrong about so many things, but especially about one thing she'd said during that final confrontation. "You'll regret leaving this family," she'd told me. I didn't regret it at all. The only thing I regretted was not leaving sooner. I folded Julian's letter and put it in a drawer, a reminder of a chapter of my life that was firmly closed. Then I turned back to my work, to the business I'd built, to the life I was creating on my own terms. Revenge had been satisfying in the moment, but freedom was so much better.